Why is praise and worship so important? We're on lesson 10, and there should be really 10 reasons on why praise and worship is important. And there are principles we're going to learn at the end that will help better understand praise and worship. And they're principles that give you understanding on why did we start with word power? Because you need to understand the power of your words. Because the power of your words flow into your worship. They flow into your praise. So you take that tool, combine it with another tool. You have your words that are one tool. You have praise and worship, which is another tool, and you combine them. So it's building this thing. It's building, and it's building, and it's building. Well, we're going to be talking about building something tonight, on why your praise and worship are so important. We're going to go to Luke chapter 13, and we're going to start at verse 10. And he, Jesus, was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. You may be seated because we're going to be in a long set of scriptures. Thank you. You may be seated. What is the synagogue? That's the tabernacle. That's church. That's church. Very important you understand that. And behold, there was a woman which had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bowed together, and could no wise lift up herself. So she was like hunched. Okay, she was hunched, so she couldn't stand straight up. And when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said unto her, Woman, thou art loosed from thine infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and glorified God. Verse 14. And the ruler of the synagogue, that's the pastor. You're in church, that's the pastor. Answered with indignation, because that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, and said unto the people. So he wasn't directing this at Jesus. He was directing it at his congregation. Okay, important to note, he wasn't coming against Jesus. He was saying, look, this man just did something, now I got to correct what he just did. Because that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, and he said unto the people, there are 6 days in which men ought to work, and them therefore come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. So for 18 years, this woman is coming to church, and in one day she gets healed, and the pastor's upset because she got her healing on the Sabbath. Verse 15. And the Lord answered him and said, Thou hypocrite, doth not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or his ass from the stall and lead them away to water? So think about where we're at for just a minute. Jesus is almost taken back by what this pastor's doing. A life has just been restored, and you want to bring up religion. You want to bring up your traditions, your customs on what you do and don't do. You want to bring that up after someone just got healed after 18 years. And that is a very scary place to be. When a church, when a pastor, when a bishop, when an elder, when whoever holds customs and rituals over people. Jesus held people over customs and rituals. But the church likes to hold customs and rituals over people. Very important you distinguish what's going on here. He's saying, look, I don't like that you healed her today. You could have done it any of these other 6 days. But our law states that you don't do nothing on the Sabbath. Yet here you come, Jesus, wrecking our religion, wrecking our beliefs, wrecking our ideology, and that's not what we do. So the ruler of the synagogue, the pastor of the church, is saying, look, our customs, Our rituals are more important than her getting her healing. Now, it doesn't say it, but by him and his comment saying, this should not have happened today, he's saying that she should have waited to get the healing. Now, Jesus was perfect. He had no sin. But I can only imagine Jesus in this moment. Because I would want to throat punch him. If I was Jesus, I'd go right to this pastor and just sock him right in the jaw. Because his comment makes no sense. This idea that you didn't want this woman to be healed just because it's the Sabbath. But you are going to go home today and feed your cattle. You're exercising something on the Sabbath. So it's okay for you to do your thing on the Sabbath, but when someone else needs something, it's not okay. Because you're the pastor, because you're the ruler of the synagogue, because you're the man, it's okay for you, but when the people need something, it's not. Now, we don't know Jesus' thoughts, but we know Jesus was taken back by the comment. Because he straight up calls him a hypocrite, and he calls him out. Okay, I mean, that's probably as close as we're going to get. Now, we don't know what kind of tone he used, but I can only imagine that the tone was not a very nice tone. Going to verse 16. And ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan hath bound, lo, these 18 years be loosed from his bond on the Sabbath day? And when he had said these things, all his adversaries were ashamed. And all the people, now you have to know there's a difference here. All his adversaries, do you know who his adversaries were? The religious people. So the church was mad at Jesus, but the world was happy. Because all the people rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. So there were multiple religious people upset that this woman got her healing. But the world, the people were excited. Now, how backwards is that? But yet, I have seen time and time again where the world celebrates a victory and the church does not. You have friends that are in church that celebrate something you have accomplished more than your church family. Verse 18. Then he said, unto what is the kingdom of God like? And whereunto shall I resemble it? It is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and cast into his garden. And it grew and waxed a great tree, and the fowls of the air lodged in its branches of it. And again he said, whereunto shall I liken the kingdom of God? It is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till the whole was leavened. And when he went through the cities and villages teaching, and journeyed toward Jerusalem. Now here's what's odd about this story. So Jesus rebukes the religious people, and then he starts talking about the kingdom. Now, as if Luke didn't know where to put this story at, the woman who was loosed, he didn't know where to put the story. So it almost seems like he smushed it between a teaching. Because it's odd how we're teaching, we get the healing, and then we're teaching. Because what's going on before this is Jesus is talking about the fig tree that's not done nothing for 3 years. So Jesus is saying, look, the vineyard owner Cut it down. That's the parable. That's the story going on right before this miracle. But then the miracle happens, and then it's like Jesus goes right back to teaching. So it's almost like, you know how when people are up here preaching, AIM was a great example of it with the conference, right? So you have a preacher up here, you have an evangelist. He's preaching, he pauses, gets a word, goes to somebody, speaks a word to them, and then go back to preaching. That's kind of what it seems like here. Jesus is teaching, stumbles upon a woman who needs a miracle, boom, performs it, and goes back to teaching. And that's kind of what it looks like. But he doesn't go anything about the miracle. And we want to know, well, Jesus, school these religious people some more. Talk about the miracle. That's what we want to know. Why are you going back and teaching? It just doesn't kind of make sense. So at first glance, this miracle is really a diversion from his teaching. So is this story really just a random act during his teaching? Or did his teaching have a meaning behind the miracle? Because Jesus knows how to perfectly work something with not skipping a beat. Well, this story actually flows great with the next teaching about seed. Because the woman gets her healing. She gets the miracle after 18 years, and then we start talking about a seed. This is where we must replace our religious mindsets of what we've been taught year after year with kingdom mindset.
Right, kingdom.
It's very important that after 2 years we understand how kingdom operates. Kingdom does not operate the same way religion does. It does not operate with rituals. Okay? It's a concept that we've been told about God, but all the concepts about God that we were told were wrong. And we're viewing things differently than how we were taught to view them. Right? The kingdom is us operating here on earth as if heaven is here. He gave us dominion. He gave us authority on this earth at the very beginning. Adam forfeits authority. Okay, so now God has to come back, sow himself, that way he can put us back in proper authority. Then he gives us keys. He shows us patterns. He gives us protocols on how much we can control, how much heaven we get to experience.
Yes.
And then we get to the point where God does suddenlies and he does immediately's, and we all love instantly's and those things that just happen in a moment. But we learned that God does not use those very often. Those immediatelys, those suddenlies do not work as often as we want. Here's the thing about the kingdom you have got to understand. This is a kingdom principle that we have no understanding about. The things of the kingdom must build equity. The things of the kingdom are not always and suddenlies and immediatelys. That can happen. But the kingdom is about building equity into something. Now, this is not a coincidence that this story, that a woman was healed after 18 years, and Jesus starts to talk about a seed. Because during those 18 years, she faithfully came to the synagogue, church. After 18 years of coming to the church, that day was her day. So if we take those 18 years and we just guess that they were 52 weeks in those 18 years, she went to church 935 times. And had no miracle, had no manifestation of it. But 936 was her service. It was service 936 that the healing manifested. So Jesus correlates this with a seed. It's like a mustard seed. It's extremely small. But if you cultivate it long enough, it will grow into a mighty tree. It will grow into such a big tree that the birds can nest in it. It's like leaven, which is yeast. You take a little yeast, put it in the dough, and eventually the yeast takes over the entire dough. So God laid this principle way back in Genesis. Here's the principle. There's a planting time. There's a time of waiting. Then there's a time of harvest. You plant the seed, you wait, and you get harvest. Seed, time, harvest. Seed, time, harvest. It is not seed, harvest. Seed, time, harvest. As long as the earth remains, there will be seed, there will be time, and there will be harvest. That is all the way back in Genesis. You do not plant seed and immediately get harvest. There is a process that must be done that takes what? Time. That seed must build and build and build during the season of time. It's got to build equity within itself. And although you don't see it, although it's underneath the surface like we know, and you don't know what's going on, eventually the harvest manifests without you knowing what was being built underneath the ground. That's how kingdom works. Seed time, you have a season of a seed, you have the season of waiting, and then you have the season of harvest. What is it? Seed, time, and harvest. It is not seed and harvest, but yet that's what everybody wants. And that's the frustration. Because we don't understand this principle. We don't understand that there's a time you plant. There's a time you wait. During that waiting time, you cultivate. Then there will be a time that you harvest it. You do not plant it and go and harvest it. Yes, there are immediatelys and suddenlies that God can do. But most of the time, those immediatelys and suddenlies that we witness weren't immediatelys and suddenlies. It was a seed that got planted, the process had been fulfilled, and then the manifestation of the time has happened. But we think, oh, well, they got their miracle day. It was immediately. But you don't know what was going on with the time. Amen. So Jesus healed someone, and it said immediately. But that was the manifestation of the healing. You didn't see the 18 years. Okay, we talked in our last lesson how when God healed, even Jesus when he healed, right? It said that same hour. It wasn't immediately. Even when Jesus laid hands, God in flesh, there were times where there was a period that they had to wait for the manifestation. So Jesus is trying to teach us here with the example of the woman. Look, this miracle didn't start today. You are witnessing the manifestation today, but it didn't start today. And we miss that. Why does the kingdom operate like this? Well, that doesn't make much sense. Why does your praise and your worship have to build equity? Why do you have to build upon each service with your praise and your worship? Why can't you have your harvest immediately? Why can't God just do everything suddenly? Why can't He just do everything immediately? Because the world can come in here, mimic what you do, and get the same results. So someone could come in here, clap how you clap, lift your hands how you lift your hands, sing how you sing, and with no love for God, they are performing just to get something from Him. So the kingdom says, we're going to make sure that only those who truly want the manifestation get the manifestation. You can't just come in here and think you're going to praise something into your hands. Because the kingdom, you have to build equity. How bad do you want that manifestation? Because it don't happen right then and there. And you would have people that do not love God, care nothing about Him, but come in here and abuse His privilege. Because here's the thing, people don't want to pay your price. They don't want to pay the price that you paid. If there's something that's worth, then you are willing to work for it. But if there's something you want, there's always a price that must be paid. The things of the kingdom must build equity. It takes time for the manifestation of the harvest because you have to get the seed planted. Some people don't even plant the seed. They're just standing here waiting for a miraculous harvest to happen, although they've not planted any seed. Or they plant the seed and then come over here and say, where's my harvest, God? I have the seed, where's my harvest? Yet they miss the time. They miss where I have to cultivate the seed that I planted, so I have to pay the price. I have to sacrifice for the seed. That way, eventually, I will get said promise of my harvest. Everything in our lives should build equity. Our retirements build equity. Our properties, our stocks, even our relationships must build equity. Pastor and them have been here for 7.5 years. What have they done? In those 7.5 years, they've built equity with you. So you trust them enough to do something on your behalf. Marriage builds equity with each other. But so often, people want a return on their investment without paying the price called time. We don't want to pay that price. People see a harvest having no idea what it took to cultivate the promise. That is how the kingdom works. You have a seed time, you have a waiting time, and you have a time of harvest. You do not just fast one time. You don't just pray one time. You don't just give one time. And that's frustrating to us because we think if we did it one time, we expect an immediately. We expect a suddenly. We expect because we did this the one time, our harvest should be here. And Jesus is trying to paint us a picture with this woman, with the teaching about a seed. This is what the kingdom is like. The kingdom is not about the harvest. That's not what the kingdom's about. But that's all we as the people focus on. The people saw the result without seeing the seed and without seeing the time. Because it's getting the seed planted in your soil, the good soil, and then cultivating it in time. That's where the kingdom comes from, because if you know what seed to get, and you know how to plant it, and you know how to cultivate, the harvest will always come. So it's not, hey, I want an apple tree. Can you give me an apple tree? No, I'm going to give you a seed. Because if I give you a seed, you can plant it and have multiple apple trees. You saw the manifestation today, but you didn't see the 18 years where she faithfully came to the synagogue hunched over. You were blind to see all the times she praised and worshiped, even when she didn't feel like it, even when she can't stand straight up. You were blind for all the times that she gave. You were blind these 18 years because during these 18 years, she was building equity and building equity. And it took 930 services to build that equity. But on 936, I bet she's glad that she went to service 936, because that's when the equity said, here's your return on investment, now here's your miracle. Yes, God can do immediatelys and suddenlies. But we miss how the manifestations happened. Because we may think something is immediately and suddenly when we have no idea what seed was planting, and we have no idea how much time was put into cultivating the promise. We think everything is immediately and suddenly, when that's just the manifestation that happened. Not realizing that it was building, and it was building, and it was building. It was building equity. Every time you came, it built equity. Every time you gave, it built equity. Every time you magnified His holy name, it built. Every time you praised, it built. Every time you worshiped, it built. Every time you sang, it built. Every time you were here when you didn't want to be here, it was building and building and building. And you never know what Sunday, you never know what Tuesday, that equity would say, here is your miracle. That is why you cannot stop building, because it may take 935 services, but at 936 your miracle will manifest. You never do something one time in the kingdom. God says, I am laying this principle out now. The kingdom does not work like that. You have to get the seed, you have to wait, you have to cultivate during the wait, and then your promise will come with the harvest. First Lady, you could start playing. That's why you keep doing, and you keep doing. You do it when you don't feel like it. You do it when you don't feel anything. You keep doing it. You keep doing it. And even though nothing is happening that you see, you have no idea what equity is getting built and how it's being built and how it's being built. Jesus even gave a parable about the persistent widow, that she bugged the king so much. The king said, I'm tired of this. Here you go. Stop bugging me. And you give and you keep giving. You keep sacrificing and you keep it and you keep. And you keep building your praise. You keep building your praise. You keep building worship until that thing that you've built so much equity into pours out on your life. It could be next Sunday. It could be tonight. It could be 3 Sundays away. You never know. That's why you have to keep building and building and building. That thing takes time. It takes time to cultivate. It takes time to manifest. And here's the problem that we face. Because the more we advance in our society, the more technology we get, the less and less we care about time. We are systematically being programmed to care less and less about time and more about immediately and suddenly. So we take that culture and we place that same concept in the kingdom. But Jesus says, my kingdom does not operate like that. You cannot take your culture and try to apply it to my kingdom, because my kingdom has already been established with patterns, with protocols, with orders. It's already there. And we get frustrated because we are being trained to want immediately and suddenly, and everything's at the click of a finger, and we can have everything the next day. So we take that same process and we apply it to our relationship with God. We want the 40-year marriage in our 1-year marriage. We want the 60-year ministry in our 10-year ministry. We want that 30-year relationship with God with our 5-year relationship with God. So we look at someone and say, I want that, but they've been doing it for X amount of years. You don't just get that. You don't just get the cultivation of a long-lasting marriage in 5 years. You don't get a relationship with God by just knowing Him for a couple years. You get it after experience, after experience, after knowing, after intimacy, after knowledge, after understanding. But that's not the direction we're going in our society. And if you're doing something and seeing no results, keep doing it. When the prayers aren't being answered, you keep praying, because you have to build it. When that giving's not giving, or when your giving isn't doing what you thought it would, you keep giving. Because eventually that giving will pour out, because you're building. And you're building. And you're building. And you're tired of giving your time. And you're tired and this. And you don't feel anything. You're tired of that. And I just don't want to today. And you have to keep doing it. Why? Because you're building. And you're building. And you're putting equity in that thing. Don't stop just because you're promised, just because the manifestation didn't happen today. Because it just wasn't ready to manifest that day, because you have to build it some more. And you have to put more into it. And eventually, there will be a tipping point in which I cannot take any more. Now I must pour this out, and everything that you put into it will come back on you, fulfilling what you've exhausted. That's why our praise and our worship are so important. That's why we have to come in here regardless of how we feel, regardless whether we have no drums. That's why our praise and our worship, we have to come in here and build upon the next one, and build upon the next one. We have to build that equity, because the more you put into your praise and worship, the more equity you are putting into the bucket. That's why you have to keep doing it. You do it when you don't feel like it. I don't feel like raising my hands. I don't feel like singing. I don't feel like really doing anything. But it's in those moments that you say, it's not about that. It's about giving this back to God, and I got to start putting back. I got to start building equity. I got to start building this thing. I got to start building this thing. Because what may take you 10 years, maybe could take you 5, depending on the activity of your worship. If you have a bank and you want to put $100 in there, well, you'll get to that $100 if you put 10s and 20s, but if you put pennies and nickels, it's going to take some time for you to reach that goal. Your praise and your worship is critical to building equity for you, because eventually that thing that you've poured into will be a tipping point, and it can't contain anymore, and it will pour out upon you, and that's when the manifestation of that thing that you need happens. But you gotta keep building it. You don't just do it when you feel like it. You don't just do it on Sundays and Tuesdays. But you build that thing Monday. You build it on Wednesday. You build it on Thursday. You build it on Friday. And you keep building, and you keep building, and you keep doing it, and you keep doing it until that thing manifests what you need. Building equity, that is what the kingdom is. Seed, time, harvest. Seed, time, harvest. You have to go get your seed. You have to get the right seed, not just any seeds. You have to plant the seed. Then when it's planted comes time. Comes you cultivate it. You water it. You make sure it's getting sun. You make sure it's sheltered. You make sure it's protected. And you do that long enough, eventually the promise manifests. That's what the kingdom is. Because if you know what seed to grab, if you know when to plant it, how to plant it, if you know how to cultivate it, you will get the promise every single time. That's the key to it. The key is, yes, I can unlock the door and get something. And yes, there are promises that say, well, all I got to do is this and I get it. But there's also many other things that require seed time, require time of waiting, and harvest time. Stop expecting your seed to manifest without time going in it. Stop wanting someone else's harvest without even planting the seed and without cultivating it during that time. Because nothing will destroy a person more than seeing something that someone else has, envying that thing and trying to do what they're doing, not knowing the price that had to get paid to get the promise. And then we'll get frustrated because say, well, we planted the seed, we're doing everything they are doing, and we're wanting a harvest without paying a price. But the kingdom says if you want something, there's a price that you will have to pay for it. First Lady, I don't have a closing at all. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to build on what you've already built on. You're putting equity into the bucket. Because you never know. Tonight could be the night it tips. Or it could be that tonight was just enough for it to tip Sunday. So build and keep building and keep doing it when you don't feel like it. And when you don't feel good and your mind's everywhere, you keep doing it. And you keep building. And you keep building.